Thanks for coming out. So we're here to talk about really, Jenkins is a great starting point. It's so versatile. There's so much you can do with it. The price is right, so you can pull off the whole shadow IT thing and sneak it in and show off some cool things and generate some interest. And that's largely what this talk about. But for any of you Bullwinkle fans out there, everything needs two titles, right? So not only is this about making strides towards enterprise scale, this is a talk that's been kicking around my head for probably at least a year now, and it's the idea of a DevOps minimal viable product, right? And I've been on the circuit a lot at DevOps days and a lot of conferences, and there's a lot of people showing up and wanting to understand what it is and how do you get started, right? And I'm not going to try and tell you what it is, but I do think I can help you understand how to get started, and Jenkins has a lot to do with that. So just to kind of set the tone here, really everything for me centers around the idea of setting up a software factory. And a couple of years ago, I was sort of a lone voice against a lot of the sort of DevOps luminaries in the Twitterverse on this notion of a DevOps team and the tools even being important. Now having said that, DevOps is 90% change and 10% tools. But we're not going to have that 90% change without the tools, therefore we can't overlook them. It reminds me a lot of an old Uncle Bob Martin article, if anyone remembers, The Land That Scrum Forgot. And he talked about the necessity of tools, even though agile teams could go out and do whatever, and we didn't want to really tell you what to do. There were certain things like unit testing and certain things that were just a given, and we kind of had to accept. And I think the software factory is that for the DevOps. And because we're going to use it as a platform, and hopefully this becomes more apparent as I go, we're going to use it as a platform to make the work visible, right? If we start to automate things, we have a codified process that we can look at and understand. It's not a mystery or a black box that other people do behind a ticketing system. That transparency is going to start to drive collaboration, right? When we'll get more into this, but now that we have something we can look at, we can talk about it. And the other big thing that people are seeing is this is the opportunity. The software factory is really the opportunity to build quality in. I'm using quality as a huge umbrella term that includes, audit concerns and legal concerns and security concerns. I lump all of those things under the quality umbrella. And just so that there's something that actually comes out of this, this is really based on the last couple of years of work that I've done, not my current employer. And the results are stuff that we saw. And we'll get to that, where we were able to drive down mean time to detection, really drive down mean time to remediation, a massive reduction in rework, driving up quality, and all of that regained rework, and we'll talk about this at the end with the people, really led to increased productivity, increased innovation, and a lack of feeling overwhelmed. Everyone in IT is like too busy to do the things they know they need to do because they're just trying to stay afloat, right? So this is a way to sort of undo that cycle. But again, I don't want to ignore culture, right? So I will try to take some time to define culture a little bit. To me, so culture outside of the workplace involves the music and how we dress, and it involves a lot of things. Inside the workplace, it's largely just our shared norms, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable in our company, and how we talk about that, right? And it comes up in a lot of the state of the DevOps report. Do you shoot the messenger? Do you, is it a generative culture? Do you try to learn blameless postmortems, right? Really, which is just what are the norms and how do we talk about it? So while I don't know a good way to just tell you how to go change a culture, I do think that if we do something that changes people's behaviors and we start to get picky about the words we use and change the language around it, then a culture will have to shift. And I think it'll go in the direction we want. And for me, the software factory, the tooling, the unimportant part, is the platform and the catalyst for all of that, right? Because it's going to change the way people operate, it's going to change the way they think about it, and it's going to drive that transparency and that collaboration. So we're going to talk about a tool chain and a software factory, but this is really how to start the cultural change, right? We're going to change their behaviors, we're going to change their language. And just to level set, we're going to talk about a minimum viable product. So while we all know that DevOps looks like a car, we can maybe agree on that. I am not telling you what the wheels look like here. I'm maybe getting us to a bicycle, right? This might be a bicycle. It's not going to look like DevOps in the end. But I do think it's going to give you something to realistically make it seem like it's within reach by the time we get to the end of this. So this was my validating moment in the 2014 State of the DevOps report. This was about the time the community gave up the idea that DevOps teams were evil. This was about the time they started to understand what's actually happening in most shops that were trying to head down this journey. And they came up in the tail end of not the original report, but the findings that was given at the Velocity conference later. They came up with this rubric, right? And this is sort of Gene Kim and Nicole and all those, They analyzed all the data and they came and told us what they thought about it. And the number one surprise to them was the importance of version controlling your artifacts moving into your environments, right? That was a better indicator than source code control. Like if you could skip source code control and version your artifacts and you would be better off, right? That was a shocking finding as far as they were concerned. It was and you see it's in every category. It's like version control, version control, version control, right? And if I didn't mention it, version control your artifacts. Where I think they sort of misstepped is I don't like continuous delivery up there as a deployment frequency throughput, because to me that's a superset. We're all here trying to get to continuous delivery, and continuous delivery is a little bit of a holy grail because there's a whole lot of things you got to do to get to continuous delivery. And I think what they meant to say is that it was just deployment automation. I mean, continuous is like one of my least favorite words right now because I feel we abuse it left and right. I just feel it's really overused. Everything wants to be continuous. We're going to have continuous improvement. We're going to have continuous integration. We're going to have continuous delivery. We're going to continuously talk about continuousness. And it sort of gets old after a while. But I will say deployment automation is going to be key. And if we just start in that quadrant on those two things with our software factory, we can really put a dent. We can show value. We can start to justify funding and get initiatives off the ground. And that's what really this is about. We're going to look at a tool chain that costs virtually nothing. And it's going to allow you to demonstrate some value, and then you're going to get some money to go buy Cloud Bees instead of just Jenkins. You're going to be able to, go up on all the other tools and buy a release automation tool. So keep that in mind. This, to me, was very validating. This is where we're focused on. I think this is where you start. And it's based on my own experience. So this predates this. This is anyone who read Continuous Delivery, Jess Humble, and I always forget the other guy's name. There was two different parts they talked about. One was the value stream. They outlined the value stream as being build, deploy, test, and release. And we can argue the nuances, but that's what was in that book. And then in the book, they specifically said you have to decompose your applications, and we can functionally decompose virtually any application into code, config, data, and then they said environment, right? And environment's obviously a pretty big term. I like to spike it out a little bit better because I like to talk about, where there's a platform layer, there's an infrastructure layer. There's opportunities that even while you're just doing deployment automation, maybe to static environments, that other work can be going on. And let me just back up a step. All of this was done in the context of a traditional non-technology company, right? So I'm at an insurance company before. These guys are really slow and behind. So that's sort of my backdrop. If you're coming from more of an engineering culture, maybe this doesn't, you probably don't have these problems, and this talk will be a lot less interesting to you. So in that vein, though, and I'm specifically saying we're keeping testing out of scope. I am not going to try to tackle testing. Testing is the long pole in the tent, in my opinion. It's the hardest thing of all of this to do because there's so many facets of it. There's so many things that have to be done. Lots of different platforms, lots of different apps, lots of different needs. There's not a sort of a one methodology to test them all that I know of anyway. So we will talk briefly about, just a little bit about testing, but we're just going to focus on how do we build, deploy, and release code, config, and data. So here's my sort of high level. This to me is what most traditional non-technical companies are up against. You got lots of static environments all over the place. How many you have in your SDLC varies. I came from a place that had as many as 9. I talk to customers these days that have even more than that. Not really sure why, but this is sort of the idea. But we fundamentally know that we have source code control, right? Everyone's using source code control. It's feeding into our build system. We're all here because of Jenkins. Again, the price is right. Why would you not use Jenkins is sort of beyond me, at least as a starting point. a little homage to us, but some kind of binary manager, right? You gotta manage the consumption of your components. You need a place to store the things you're building. And then I've generically put ARA out there as application release automation. But the good news is Jenkins can do that too, at least initially. I'm not really sure it's sort of the end goal state. I'm not sure it was purpose-built with release automation in mind, and I'm aware that a lot of shops are successful with it in that role. But with the rise of so many other tools in that space, and as you become more, sort of dynamic, we'll have to see if it actually becomes the deployment automation or if it's just the orchestration on top of it or something else. Sonar is another one of these tools. It's just in every shop. Sonar and Jenkins are the two tools. You walk into a shop, everybody has Jenkins, everybody has Sonar. It's literally like 95% or something. Like, I ran into the first customer ever the other day that wasn't using it and hadn't heard of it, and I was sort of taken aback by that. And really, so this whole goal of the software factory, though, is to find a way to build quality in, right? We want to wrap it all in governance. We want to get all of our stakeholders to the table and ask them what they need to sleep at night. That has to be in here. So, what about our code scans? What about, quality reports? What about a code review process? How are we addressing our legal obligations or awareness around our legal, open source consumption? Audit. What does audit care about? So it's a chance to use this platform to say, let's bring people to the table and talk about what we have to do in our automated factory that'll let you sleep at night. Right? So how can we build it in, bake it in, and we want the machines doing it. We don't want humans going to some Word doc, checking off some things, saying, yeah, I'm doing my little step, and it involves me manually sort of inspecting things and then, putting a document in SharePoint or something. That does not work. It doesn't scale. It can't keep up. So we have to automate all of the things, right? We have to figure out a way to get it all in here. Now, as you become more, sort of dynamic provisioning stuff. Maybe you have environments actually feeding your source code control. Maybe you're doing some more provisioning and testing off of Jenkins. Like I said, we can niggle around on this, but in general, this is sort of what a factory looks like. So with all that context, I took a team, chartered. We had a high-profile application that we were chartered with, so we were that team that was allowed to break the rules, right? This was a strategically important project. It had to get out. It was going to differentiate our company. So teams like mine were allowed to go around ops and do things that other teams weren't, but it also meant that it gave us a chance to demonstrate the art of the possible, right? It gave us a chance to show that there was a different or better way to do things. So my sort of mantra to my team was, how do we get to zero-touch deployments, right? And at first, that was a huge challenge. We had some awful systems. You had to look at like the log and see when a cache was primed before you could move on. So we had to write log parsers, and it was the first one was really, really hard. And then we kind of quickly learned, well, now we have to rethink our use of snapshots and stuff like that. We really want to start, everything needs to be a release candidate. We got to start versioning at the beginning of the process, not sort of at the tail end. And the key is it had to be for code config and data. The benefits that I'm going to talk about at the end do not happen if you don't do all three, and we'll get more into that near the tail end. But if you just did code config and data still had a traditional path, you won't get any of the benefits. It just falls apart. It has to be automated together. We have to talk about specific versions of each things that we're moving. Here I mentioned we can use Jenkins as that application release automation. It has the SSH plugin. It's not fancy, but you can get whatever you need done, and there's other sort of tools that can help with that, or at least pieces of it. But it will allow you to do it. In my company, though, the idea of a button in Jenkins that could push code to some environment scared the hell out of them. So we had to eventually kind of back away from that. But in terms of demonstrating the fact that it's even possible, that it can be done, it's fantastic, right? Because then I do get to the benefits and I can get the funding to get the things I need. So the other thing is we're going to talk about creating a view of what's where. I mentioned start small. I was in a fairly one line of business, couple of important apps. I wasn't trying to tackle the enterprise portfolio yet. So in terms of creating a view of what's where, and this was a really clever thing. I was really proud of one of my sort of new college hires figured out. Is we were able to just make a grid, not unlike this, actually a little cruder, but more information, in Confluence. And then there's a plugin in Jenkins that can go update a Confluence page. So I made a grid, and you got to put all these tokens in every one of these spots, and it's a little tedious to set the first one up, but every time I pushed a component to an environment, it updated a Jenkins page. This was in and of itself kind of monumental. This was like changed everything for all the stakeholders, because nobody kept asking me for latest. This was always the bane of my existence. I've been in build and release management for 18 years, and I always got people coming to me and say, Kurt, I need the latest code in this environment. And I'd always be like, well, so when you say latest, do you mean like what was tested? Is it in the dev environment and he wants it to move? Or do you know somebody that just committed some code? Like, what do you mean by latest, right? Help me out. This fundamentally changed all of those conversations to now everybody talked about specific versions. I want this version of the database. I want the collection of versions in QA. It also meant a lot of my stakeholders understood that our app was made up of more than one thing or two things. It was actually made up of 5 database schemas, multiple servers, a front end, a middleware, and it was all kind of spelled out to a lot of stakeholders had no clue. They were like, I always wondered about that, you know? So now they could see like these were the pieces that made this app up, and these are the versions that we're talking about. Something very specific. Now my later environments could go, they typically would just look at QA, say, Kurt, I want those versions, what's in QA. We're having a prescriptive dialogue now. When I deliver it to them, there's no surprises, right? So, and this was a great low-tech solution. Like, you know, just have Jenkins update a Confluence page. You can create a basic what's where. And that's, you know, that's like a basic problem in and of itself. Most shops can't tell you what version of what's where. It's just sort of like, yeah, the latest of the May branch is over here and June's over there, but, you know, I'm not really sure exactly which one it is because they're all snapshots or something like that. So this was a big deal for us. So now deployment automation, right? So to get there, deployment automation to me was just it was the thing that made it happen. So even though I had license to do this without, you know, sort of people's permission, really what it meant was I still went out to those folks that I was allowed to sort of ignore, and I made sure I included them. And we just started talking about, like, okay, well, you know, my system administrators, we're going to need a landing zone. We're going to need a place to put stuff, right? And I want to talk to my middleware folks. What IDs are you using, and how do you do deploys? And, you know, and it got us talking across these boundaries. No longer was it submit a ticket, right? That ticket actually spawned off 3 more tickets. You have no idea what's going on. Eventually, they tell you it's back, and then you realize it doesn't run. This was like, you know, this just started that cross-silo talking. This was me on the delivery side, talking to 2 of my ops partners, talking to my prod support people, because this was going to hit them in the end. Don't forget your prod support people. Get them involved early. Don't show up on the doorstep of prod with a new thing. And the DBAs, for the first time, we're bringing the DBA conversation in too, right? And that's a case, there's another, you know, if you don't know about Liquibase, it's another free tool. It can start to version your schemas. You can start to check in, you know, those things as code. You can package them up and have a deployment automation that starts to guarantee you can remake your database from scratch. You know what version each database is at. And now when I deploy, I have a known good version of code with a known good version of data with a known good version of config. And when that's all known good in dev and I move it to QA and it doesn't work, real quick, what's the problem? Anyone? Well, it's always the environment. Well, it's the config, right? The one piece. The data and the code was good. We just forgot the config. And this was our most common thing, right? We'd get it all working in dev. We go to promote it, and we're like, yeah. But then we would take the time to fix the config for not only QA, but every other environment, right? And so now think about that. Most of my problems were happening in dev or QA, and I think we talked about that. And we were fixing them fast because there was only one real suspect in the room anymore. My other things were sort of known goods. So the suspect was, wow, you know, it's probably just config. And it changed the dynamic. We used to go from, you know, late in the testing cycle, we're trying to update UAT, we're up against it, the environment doesn't come up. So what do? Well, you naturally get your 2 most expensive developers and you have them start figuring it out, right? And it takes hours, right? And you're just sweating it. Now I go from that to I got the college intern on the summer saying, you know what, go look at the config, fix it, and redeploy the config for me, right? I mean, it went literally from 2 of my most expensive resources spending hours to slightly overstated, but the summer intern could fix it in minutes in most cases. Maybe you had to ask someone. And this, so what have we done now? We've started to make the end-to-end process of how code becomes a product visible to everyone, right? And we're having these conversations. And that's why I'm saying this is like the beginning of DevOps, because it sort of forces these conversations to happen. And it can be hard at first, right? It was hard to get the buy-in. People are really questioning everything. You get a lot of questions around, well, can we, what about SOX? What about PCI? What about, can we even do this? But you can slug through it, right? You can slug through these things. The test that I did go for, acceptance test. So once I got my deployment automation going, I kind of looked at my QA partners. I'm like, do you guys run some kind of acceptance test? I'm assuming you run something before you begin testing, right? And of course, they did. They had, it's basic stuff. Can you log in? Can you do this? Can you do that? You hit a couple drop downs, hit all the tabs. Yeah, it looks like it's, everything's talking to everything. It looks like it's suitable to test. It may suck, but it's suitable to test. So we partnered with them real quick and said, we can call these tests, right? We can add this as another step. So that was the one. And then what we did is we partnered with them on how to sort of abstract them so they could be run against any environment. Their tests tended to be sort of focused just on their environment, or they were sort of hard-coded for other environments. And so we just sort of partnered with them, brought in some extra, programming horsepower, and helped them make it so those, in our case, it was probably the HP testing tool, which I loathe, but it was something like that. We learned how to parameterize it so that we could say, run the test against this environment, now run the same test against that environment, right? So that was the one thing we worked on, and that was huge, because think about this. It went from me just sort of, trying to do a whole bunch of steps, bring an environment up. Half the time it didn't come up. Even when it did, maybe it wasn't suitable for testing. Now I went from saying, I've done my job, can you check it out, to now I'm saying, not only have I done my job, but I've checked it out, and I know it's ready for you, right? So my job as that code steward, the guy that was moving all this around, I was giving a much more positive handoff. I was giving them something that I knew had met at least some minimum criteria, and it was suitable for them to start spending time on and not waste time on. Because if, I don't know if anyone's been involved in that effort, you have an army of QA people working for days only to find out you didn't have what you needed and it was all a waste, right? So I've been there. But deployment automation is big, and so here's the results that we saw. First of all, we automated, so deployment time shrunk dramatically. I'm going to just say 50%. It ran. There was cases where things got sped up by, hundreds of percent, but they were just truly awful processes. There was other cases where they didn't really speed up all that much because they were pretty decent processes to start with, and I was just calling their process, so there's not a lot of gain. But sort of in the aggregate, although, I'm going to point out another example later, like 8 hours to 2 hours. But let's just say roughly, I could just say we were cutting 50% off all of our deployment times. Now, and I was having I literally went from a 50-50 shot at an environment starting. We tracked this when we were sort of still doing things by hand. It was like 50-50. It was a coin toss whether or not it would even come up, let alone pass the acceptance test. And we went to less than 10%, and it was always config, and it always took minutes to fix. Right? So that was a huge win. So all my MTTD is now happening in Dev or QA for the most part. We were very rarely surprised in any environment after QA. Like I said, so you get sucked into the Dev, you forget to go to QA with something, but when you fix it, you don't wait to smack your head on the wall again. You fix all the other environments with that config. And sometimes that's interesting because the config is, even the development team doesn't know it for the upper environment. So you've got to start to talk to, some solution architects or some other folks and make sure we're getting the right values in all the environments. Again, MTTR from hours to minutes, it's not exaggerating. And overall, we were able to sort of quantify that we felt we took about just 40% of pure waste out of our process, of churn, of noise, of firefighting, of nonsense, right? Of all this stuff we hate as IT professionals, all the stuff that was getting in the way from us doing the work we really wanted to do. We're cleaning up other people's messes, right? So it was pretty freaking significant, right? That's 40% is a lot. But the more profound effect of all is, so that was great. That, so time is money. I can make a case. We can do some math on the burden labor rate. I can start to say we saved you $6 million last year, right? It was just straight up math. It was sort of empirical. It was logical. You couldn't really argue it. We could, fudge the numbers a little. But the more important thing was that culturally, like people went from being completely overwhelmed to all of a sudden feeling like really empowered, like really engaged, like really excited again to come to work, right? Instead of like, oh, Jesus Christ, it's deployment weekend. So it was less of that. It was like, hey, deployment weekend, that's not a big deal. I just hit a bunch of buttons. I'm going to watch everything, make sure it goes. So it changed people's attitude. I had DBAs, we were all of a sudden free from, just waiting, and we could start to then turn around and say, what can I improve? What can I work on? What else can I do? It gave you that extra bandwidth. That 40% was that bandwidth you always wanted but never had. In fact, you were probably burning over an extra 10, 20% just to keep up with all the firefighting. So these people just didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. They started to really go from feeling like, hey, I can fix and do other things, and I can come back to Kurt and say, what else can I work on? And maybe we can do this, and maybe we can do. It was a totally different atmosphere of, just complete defeat to now feeling engaged. And I don't know if anyone's read The Lean Enterprise. There's a whole talk about the Chevy plant in there. It was really just like that. Like when Toyota took over the Chevy plant, one of the criteria they had was they used all the same people, and it was like the worst Chevy plant of them all, like drinking on the job. It was a union job. It was the lowest productivity. And Toyota, to make their point, said, it's really about people, and to prove it to you, we want to bring all the same people back. And there's all these great testimonials in that book from people that worked at that plant that talked about how it changed their lives, not just at work, but at home. Right? Like it changed their attitude about the world around them. So if you haven't read that, it's a great book when you want to understand the lean stuff that we're trying to drive to. And then my last bit is, once you get people on this button, they don't go back. Like it might be a hard time to get them to the button. It can be a long kind of uphill battle. But once they have a button, then they want a button for everything else too, right? Like now all of a sudden they're like, well, I'm tired of this old because that's nonsense. I want the button. The button's awesome. Fire and forget, right? And every so often it goes off the rails. You clean it up and you fire again. It's like so powerful. So that's the thing. And then again, it's the culture. So now we have a different shared norm. The shared norm is now the button, not the spreadsheet, right? Not the Word doc. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot more to going on, but it was just dramatic even at that level, the change in people's attitude and what now have become the new norm, just because we tackled some basic deployment automation in a handful of cases, and then it just spread like wildfire from there, where now we're like looking for every opportunity. What else can I automate next? So after this, so you get to here, now you're up against the real challenge, which is scale. Right? And I don't have a lot to say on this. I trip on scale as much as the next person. But if you're in a large company, you probably have hundreds, if not more, different middleware platforms, ETL platforms, databases, web servers, ESBs, BPMs, the list goes on, right? I mean, if you're in a big company, you start to boggle at just how many different technologies and things that you're using. So you have to just keep chipping away. Like, once you can solve for deploying to Tomcat, you can deploy to any other Tomcat, but then you got to go work on, the bigger JBoss or a WebSphere or something else, right? So there's no end of work, but at least now you have the time to deal with it. Tackling automated testing now seems doable. I've taken out that noise. Now the idea of really making a run at fixing testing doesn't seem like a stretch. It doesn't seem like sort of like, that'd be great, but we're never going to do it. We've tried that like 10 times. It's never worked. Now you think maybe, just maybe we can do it, right? And you can start to go after that. And then now the idea, now we can talk about continuous delivery, right? Now we're in a place where we can have a realistic discussion about what it takes to get from where you are, which is just basic deployment automation, to continuous delivery, which is largely what? Testing, right? I mean, testing's the big one, because now if we automate that, now things just sort of keep pushing buttons when they finish, right? Or they don't if it fails. So that's the thing. And I don't think I have anything more than that. I'm keeping it short and sweet. Thanks for your time. Although I will, if there's any, we're right at the half-hour mark. That's pretty good. That's what I was shooting for. If there's any kind of questions or answers or something, I'm sure I've glossed over a lot of details.
We need to decompose any application into code, config, and data.
Yes.
So we understand how to do it with how to do continuous integration with the code, config tool, but what was the data?
Okay, excellent. So what he's asking for, code config and data was my decomposition. He's comfortable with code and config, but what about the data bit? That's where I mentioned a tool like Liquibase, a free tool. At the end of the day, what the problem domain looks like is this, or what the solution domain looks like. There's a table in your database that tells you what version it's at. Your tool looks at that table and says, you're at version X and I need to get you to version Y. Let me apply these. That way, because as you go through your environment, they're all at different baselines. So now you take that off the plate. And if you get even fancier, Liquibase has stuff like certain things will always be run, so other things will only be run once, but the bottom line is you're basically also versioning that code. And database in particular, when I inherited, was a nightmare. Literally, developers would send SQL to the DBA, who would file it in his email. And then when you asked him to update an environment, he would go in and look at the tables, and he'd be like, an index, so I must have done that. Man, it looks like that column's there, so I'm guessing you just need these. Hence my 50% success rate with code and data, right? So, yeah, I mean, Liquibase, there's some other great high-end tools after that, but again, if to start out, prove the art of the possible, use something like a Liquibase. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. A lot of your talk is non-technical, obviously, and that's cool. So I have a non-technical question. What do you do when management finds out you've got an extra 6 hours a night on build night, and when you cut 40% of your waste? How do you keep them from sucking all that up? Work expands to fill all available capacity. How do you keep now? This is the new norm, and everyone's exhausted again. How do you fight that?
That's a great question. I didn't run into that. I mean, we really were able to just reap the benefits, because we were getting the work done. There wasn't a bunch of other backlog work that we weren't getting done. And, at the end of the day, though, for me, it was a way to justify the funding if they wanted more, right? First one was free. So, now I got them hooked, right? You want more? You got to give me money. Because we got to do this with some real tools now. I mean, yeah, this proves we can do it. I'm not really sure you want to run a Fortune 100 company this way, but, it's doable. And I know it's doable, and lots of other people are doing it, and now you two are doing it. And like I said, I could do the math on the engineering hours. $6 million, give me $6 million, see what I can do with a budget this time, right? With no budget, I did pretty good. Give me a budget, I think I can kill it. Anyone else? Thanks so much.